Innovation Rockstars. Innovation Rockstars.
Our today's guest, Sven Schimpf from the Fraunhofer Group for Innovation Research.
Hi, and welcome back to a new episode of the Innovation Rockstars. I am Chris Mühlroth, and I'm pleased to welcome Sven Schimpf from the Fraunhofer Group for Innovation Research. Sven, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, before we get started with today's topics, let's talk about you first. Who are you and what is your background?
Yeah, my background is very much linked to the topic of innovation. I'm working for Fraunhofer now since 20 years. First, for a long time, closely together with many companies in the area of strategic technology innovation and R&D management. And since 3.5 years, I'm managing director of the Fraunhofer Group for Innovation Research, combined with a professorship at the University of Pforzheim in the topic area of innovation and interdisciplinarity research.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Fraunhofer Society looks back on a very long history since it was founded, I guess, back in 1949. And the list of the Fraunhofer institutes and facilities is quite long. And as you mentioned, since 2017, you are the managing director of the Fraunhofer Group for Innovation Research. Can you describe for us how this group is embedded in the entire Fraunhofer organization and what your main responsibilities are?
Yeah, to understand the role of the Group for Innovation Research, it is important to say that the Fraunhofer Society, developed from a small group of people in 1949 into a very large and complex organization with almost 30,000 people working there today in 74 institutes. And the groups at Fraunhofer, they can be imagined like a middle layer between the institutes and the central head office that is located in Munich in Germany. So in the groups, institutes are combined, brought together based on their competencies. So we have a group for production, we have a group for information and communication technologies, and we have a group for microelectronics. And since 3.5 years, we also have the Group for Innovation Research, which brings together the institutes that are more active in socio-economic and socio-technical projects. So concerning the tasks of the group, internally, we are supporting institutes in aligning, in bringing together the strategic direction of Fraunhofer. We are also supporting Fraunhofer itself with studies, foresight studies, and analysis of innovation systems. On the other hand, another key task is to bring transparency towards the outside world, because you can imagine in such a complex organization, very much driven by the institutes and on a decentral level, it is not always easy to find activities and the competencies that you are looking for.
Great. Thanks for the brief overview. That is really helpful. Now, for this episode, you brought two highly interesting studies with you. So the first one is a paper, an impulse paper on the topic Understanding Change, Shaping the Future. And a second study, a field study on disruption. Now, first of all, a very basic question. What is actually the difference between the impulse paper and the field study?
So finally, I'm not 100% sure if the saying is the same in English language. So I looked it up, but I would say the name is the program here. So if we are speaking about an impulse paper, we would like to provide impulses that enable companies, but also policymaker and academic organizations to reflect on their position in current innovation systems and provide insights on how the future will develop in this context to enable them to prepare for these futures. On the other hand, a field study is more aimed at looking into industry and identifying where they stand, what the current state is in their organizations and so on.
Okay, great. Now let's start with the first paper, with the Impulse paper. I have read it, of course, and this paper identifies a selection of trends that are likely to have a significant impact on innovation and innovation systems by 2030. And from there, you also derived a few assumptions for innovation in 2030 and described fields of action for business, for politics, for science, and for society as a whole. Now, let's dive into the contents of the paper a bit. But before that, maybe can you tell me what exactly was the motivation for this paper? Why did you actually do it?
Yes, Chris, this is very, let's say, a strong red line in here, because we looked at the innovation system, especially in Germany and Europe, but this can also be transferred to the Western world finally. And we thought, okay, we have very well-known success models of innovations that were developed in the last century. Like in Germany, for example, the car was developed here, and we still, if you look outside of your window, you will see a lot of these products still available. And then we looked into the last decades, and there we saw that it was very much influenced by digital innovations. And if you speak to managers, for example, as the Boston Consulting Group does regularly, they respond that most the companies that are appreciated being most innovative, they are mainly coming from other countries. So here the US, like Google, Apple, Amazon, and so on. And our thinking was, okay, innovation changed in the past, and we expect innovation to change in the future. So innovation activities also. What has to be done to be competitive based on innovation in the future, and considering these changes that can be anticipated already today? This was the reason why we came up with a study and why we did, let's say, a foresight study on innovation itself here.
I was just about to say, yeah, it sounds like a foresight study on innovation, which is great. Now, how did you do that? How did you derive the assumptions for the study? Which methods and tools did you use for that study?
This was more or less a standard procedure, at least for us here in the Group for Innovation Research. So we did a systems analysis to identify the influence factors and the interrelations between these influence factors. Finally, to come up with a prioritization of the influence factors, so identifying the key influence factors. We reduced them to a number of handful, 5 key influence factors here. And then we tried, based on the knowledge that is available here within the group, we projected these influence factors into the future. It can be imagined like a reduced scenario technique, but we didn't aim at multiple futures here, but we wanted really to highlight the futures, the trends that are most probable from our perspective. This is why we came up then with the development of 5 theses that are presented in the paper.
Yeah, and since I've read it, I can tell the paper is very comprehensive, great to read. And for everyone who is interested, we will, of course, post a link to it in the show notes of this episode. Now, for this interview, Sven, can you give us a brief summary of the key findings of this paper? So to make it concrete, what does innovation look like in 2030 and maybe even beyond that?
I mean, for people working in the area of innovation, many of the trends that we have integrated into the paper should not be a surprise. I mean, the key here is to provide companies with, let's say, a baseline for the reflection of their own innovation ecosystems. So the first thesis here that we formulated was that we think that innovation in 2030 will be much more open and much more flexible. Learning will be an integral part. We think that this is necessary because we will see much more technological convergence, different technological areas coming together. And also along the value chain, we will not anymore speak about single components or products, but more about solutions for the users. Which, by the way, is the third thesis here of the paper, the trend towards integrated solutions. But coming back to the first one, based on this, we think that it will be required to work together in a much more intense way here between different stakeholders, and also stakeholders that are not very much involved in innovation activities today, like citizens that are enabled by the openness of results from academia. This is the fourth thesis. Finally, we think that open science, I'm jumping a little bit around, but please look into the paper to get the overview. We think that open science will be an integral part of innovation in the future. And this enables finally everybody to get the knowledge on how a solution might be configured. But finally, the key aspect here is not having the knowledge, but it's more about finding the right knowledge and getting the insight on the user needs here towards integrated solutions. A very strong trend here that we see is in the third thesis, which is the digitalization. And we see digitalization on the one hand side as a strong influence factor on the outcome of innovation activities. But within the study, we looked more into how the digitalization will influence innovation itself, so the innovation activities. And we think that innovation processes in 2030 will be fully digitized, and that AI will play a role. We can call it even a strong role for incremental innovations in 2030. So taking over innovation activities and also developing, advancing products on its own. I mean, radical innovation, they will be, let's say, an area where humans will have the control and also add the value, add the benefit here. But for incremental innovations, if you imagine a product collecting data, bringing the data back, combining it with other market data, and then on an object-based development process, I mean, machines will be able to develop products and advance products here, at least on an incremental level. The last thesis here is very much based on the European perspective, because we think that in 2030, Europe will benefit much more than today from its position in relation to data sovereignty and data security, which will gain in importance if you look at the increased digitalization. I think this is a trend that we already see today, and already now we see companies taking benefit from that development.
Yeah, that's cool. I see a new headline for this episode incoming, which may be called the AI as the incremental innovator, or the innovator for incremental innovation. That's great. I think that's a strong trend. Totally agree. We see the same on the market and also inside companies. But I want to refer to the last point you made concerning, the European ecosystem, data security, sovereignty, and so on. What do you think? How well are we actually performing in Germany and or the European Union in terms of innovation systems and innovation strength? Are we good? Are we not that good? What do you think?
I mean, we are in a very good position, I would say. So if improvements are on the way, they are on a quite high level. But we see, especially from emerging countries, many new innovators coming up with completely new approaches of innovation, and also, let's say, with a mass of people entering the innovation sphere, I would say. So we have to be careful that we remain at our current position in the future, and that we also focus on specific areas where we remain at the very top end of innovation activities.
And where do we need to take action in the different fields or areas of business, politics, science, and a society to perform even better? Do you have some suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, innovation is very, very often, I would say, mentioned to be the competitive factor today and also in the future. And if I look into our education system, into companies and so on, I only partly see that statement reflected in reality. So there's a lot we should do here. I mean, in education, innovation should really be an integral part of everyday activities. Same in companies. Here, innovation is often appreciated as being the competence area of R&D departments. But finally, ideas can come from all sides and from all employees and companies, as well as policymakers. And also in society, we have to enable people to implement, to realize their ideas and to bring them into practice. And there's a whole set of there's the mindset behind, and there's a set of methods and enablers that we have to work upon.
Mm-hmm. Now, since we are recording this episode late March in the year 2021, would your answer have been the same before the start of the corona pandemic, so in early 2020, for example? Or would you maybe argue that the events in the past 12 months actually changed some of your points of view?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I mean, there's a very nice study from one of the institutes of the Fraunhofer Group for Innovation Research dating from 2013. And it is named Pandemic Influenza in Germany in the year 2020. So we did a foresight study in the Group for Innovation Research, predicting more or less what was happening in the year 2020 with 3 different scenarios. And if you look at those, you can quite easily see that they are a good example of how foresight works. In the case of here, the future of innovation, we published this study in 2018, so 3 years ago now. And what is interesting here, we think that based on events like the COVID-19 pandemic, foresight shall be questioned. And we did that. We are on our way to publish an update. I must say the key change here that we see is that we will be in a digitized innovation process and in the application of AI much earlier than 2030. Concerning the other thesis, there are quite a few influence factors, like also the digitalization or technological sovereignty and so on. But for the other thesis concerning openness, concerning the trend towards integrated solutions, overall, we do not see strong changes here that were influenced by the pandemic.
Okay, so we do have a big push for digitization and also artificial intelligence, but in general, the assumptions, the thesis, or the impulses you developed stayed quite stable, which I think is a totally realistic assessment of that. Okay, yeah, thanks for the overview of that study, and again, we will link the full PDF or a link to the full study in the show notes of this episode. Now let's turn to the second publication you brought for today, the practice study on disruption. I've read it too, and this is how I understood that this is about how companies identify, evaluate, and develop or implement potentially disruptive technologies. Now, first of all, same question here. What was the reason for conducting this practice study?
So the disruption field study was conducted because we wanted to find out what the current state is in companies, how companies are managing potentially disruptive technologies and innovations. The key reason for that was that within the last 10 or even 20 years, the amount of discussions on disruptive innovations was continuously increasing. And so we wanted to see if people are only talking about this topic or if they are really, let's say, doing something within their organizations.
Okay, and I guess the field study starts with the definition, the actual definition of the term disruption. Now, since we have you here, Sven, in this episode, maybe very briefly, just for the sake of definition, what defines a disruption or a disruptive innovation?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the differentiation of different innovation types, I would say, is meant to enable companies to handle these innovations, which have different, let's say, requirements in the right way. So the best known example here is the differentiation between incremental and radical innovation, differentiated by the level of performance increase or level of newness of an innovation in relation to a reference solution. So you have a reference solution on the market and you compare it to the innovation. And as you can imagine, I mean, incremental innovations, they can be done with, let's say, existing architectures, existing technologies. So you continue as you did. If you speak about radical innovations, it's more about, let's say, changing paradigms, applying new technologies, thinking about new architectures, and so on. So it requires different mindsets, different peoples, and different infrastructure. The same here happens for the differentiation between sustaining and disruptive technologies. Disruptive technologies where innovations are differentiated according to the impact of of an innovation on the market or the application area. So if we speak here in the study from an organizational, from an industry perspective about disruptions, we mean innovations that are substituting reference solutions and thereby making the investments of the incumbent companies, so the traditional market leaders, obsolete. Finally, changing the market structures in a way when new entrants they gain market leadership, and the traditional market leaders, they lose their position.
Okay, great. Thanks for the comprehensive overview. Makes perfect sense. Now let's go into the contents of this study. Let's start with the first step, which is, I guess, the identification, right? So how do companies actually deal with potentially disruptive technologies? And what did you find in your practice study? How do companies identify possible disruptions? Maybe use this as a starting point.
Yes, in the study, we looked at potentially disruptive technologies being a key enabler for disruptive innovations. If you think about digital photography, for example, where the digital sensor was one of the technologies driving this change forward, combined with, let's say, the computing power behind and so on. So in the study, we differentiated between the three phases: the identification of potentially disruptive technologies, the evaluation, and the development and implementation of potentially disruptive technologies. Starting with the identification here, we saw that a major part of companies is using the same search fields for potentially disruptive technologies and other technologies, which is, let's say, not reflecting the knowledge that is available in academia, because there it is clearly stated that most often you find potentially disruptive technologies outside of your field of competency and outside of your sector, finally.
Very interesting. Why do you think this is the case? Why do you think that companies, look oftentimes into the existing or the known search fields rather maybe new ones?
I think this is related to the group bias to a major part, because you have your perspective within a company, and this is the perspective from which you look into the world. This can be product related, this can be sector related, and so on. And it's always a major step to look beyond the horizon of your thinking model of the organization. And furthermore, often I remember a statement from one workshop participant who said that a very good indicator for potential disruptions is if the incumbents are laughing about something, so about a new entrant, about a new solution. And this reflects somehow here the mind model that is also that was confirmed somehow by the results of the study for the identification and also for the other phases.
Yeah, that's a good story, valid statement. Now, let's move on in the process. Once in the company's possibly identified possible disruptions or disruptive technologies, how do they move on? How are these technologies then evaluated? What's kind of the next steps?
For the evaluation, only a minor part of companies has really formalized processes available. A major part either has no formalized processes or is using the processes, the standard technology monitoring processes for other technologies, which is again the same situation a little bit as for the identification. And the key aspect for the evaluation is the intuition of employees. And interestingly, another aspect here is that was mentioned quite a lot, the aspect of serendipity. So the seemingly random observation and combination of rather inconspicuous clues here. Perhaps you know the saga of the Princess of Serendip, where this terminology comes from. But finally, the key question for us here is if you speak about intuition of employees or also serendipity, if there are any, let's say, enablers for the employees to really do that. So normally, if I look into the companies that I faced, I think it's not the best way to come up to the management level and say, based on my intuition or serendipitously, I think that this technology here can be potentially disruptive. I don't know if this really works in practice. I have my doubts, and I think there's a huge potential for improvement here.
Sounds like. And after that, after evaluation, maybe also with different types of experts with different backgrounds, trying to eliminate biases as good as possible, how is then the implementation or the decision for implementation being made? So what happens after maybe, companies found, okay, there is a possible technological disruption, we've evaluated it, and it may or may not fit to our strategy. Now, how do companies move on? How is the implementation decision then being made inside the companies?
The decision if a company proceeds on a potentially disruptive technologies in participating companies here is made by 95%, so almost 100%, on the executive level. And again, I would doubt if someone comes up with intuition or serendipity to let's say, get a positive answer from their side. It would be very interesting to get to know something about the negative answers from executive managers concerning potentially disruptive technologies. So how many projects are denied on that level? But I guess that it will be difficult to get data on that topic. On the other hand, if you speak about implementation, 65% of participating companies, they are developing potentially disruptive technologies based or with their existing structures and employees. And again, this reflects something that is kind of a mismatch because First, if you speak about your own employees, if we look at the automotive industry, and if you imagine an expert working for several decades in combustion engines, if you would ask him about how he would evaluate or would have evaluated the electric drivetrain, I don't know if we would have got an unbiased answer here. And same happens if you would like to develop a potentially disruptive technology for the drivetrain. This certainly might be the electric drivetrain if you compare it with combustion engines. So it is questionable if the experts working in one domain, in the traditional domain for a long time, if they are the best group to work on potentially disruption that will be able to substitute the previously existing solution here.
Yeah, totally agree. So what if I were to ask you what recommendations you would give along those 3 steps, so identify, evaluate, and decide and implement, what would be your recommendations for companies to get better in this area?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there seems to be a gap between academia and industry, which quite often happens. And I don't want to blame anyone here. This might be the cause of academia, of the results that are not sufficiently developed to be applied in industry. This might also be caused by partly ignorance of industry here concerning the results achieved by academia. But this is something where we have from both sides where we have to work upon, because we have many, let's say, in Germany, Europe, or the Western world, we have many market leaders, and we think that we already now can anticipate many potential disruptions coming up. So I would recommend to just, let's say, consider potential disruptions more specifically, both, let's say, on a strategic level and then also in operational management of technologies like the continuous monitoring and the definition of specific search fields and evaluation criteria, meant to being able to really evaluate, to identify potential disruptions here coming up.
And finally, for this study, here comes a somewhat provocative question. Yeah, given all the data you collected, given all the research that you've made, given all the insights that you have gained based on all that data, what would you say? How disruptive are we really in Germany and in Europe, especially in these days?
Yeah, I mean, I partly answered already this about the situation here of Germany, of Europe. But if we speak about innovation culture, I would say that we are not the ones taking risk on a daily basis. And I think this is always part of the game. If you speak about a potential disruption, you have finally we can call it vision-oriented research and innovation. So you have to have a strong vision, you have to believe in it, you have to take the risk, and you have to work on this innovation for a long time, because for many disruptive innovations or technologies driving these disruptive innovations, this was not from one day to the other, but this was this took a long time, and often you do not see any results in a short time horizon here.
Yeah, great and honest answer. And I think it would be, as you said, it would be beneficial specifically in Germany, Switzerland, Austria, but in entire Europe, in the entire European Union, if we would at some point in time, be a bit more risk taking, or have a bit higher willingness to take risk. I totally agree. But overall, Sven, thanks very much for introducing us to both of your publications and the insights out of it. And again, we will also link the second publication in the show notes of this episode. We were close to the end of this episode, but before we close it, let's summarize just briefly once again. So for each publication, for the first paper, the paper giving impulses with the title Understanding Change and Shaping the Future, and the second one, the field study on disruption, what would you say is the one key insight of each publication?
So for the Impulse paper, I mean, we see things that we saw in the past also developing that will develop further, like openness, like trends towards integrated solutions and so on. The most striking insight here is that innovation will change, because in the past, most often the interaction between people was in the center of innovation activities, at least in the early phases, as a key element. And we see digitalization changing the rules of the game. So if you speak about AI, coming up with ideas of combining areas that weren't combined before, we see AI developing solutions. So this changes the rules of the game, and also the mindset here of innovation managers has to change into this direction, because we often see, let's say, barriers in companies in innovation management that is related to increased levels of digitalization here. And we see from our side, we see AI and digitalization as an important tool and as a key success factor, key competitiveness factor for innovation in the future.
Yeah, and for the disruption study?
For the disruption study, I can summarize what I already said. I think it is important to integrate potential disruptions really in the strategic orientation and continuously monitor them. So, for example, use methods like trajectory paths to being able to monitor the development of technologies. Most often, potentially disruptive technologies are those technologies that develop fast and thus change the rules of the game as soon as they reach a certain milestone here, and companies have to be prepared for these situations.
Yeah, and it's definitely a long game, right? Now, before we close the meeting, I do have a final question for you, which I very much like to ask. When you look back on your time at the Fraunhofer so far, what would you say, what was your most favorite Innovation Rockstar moment so far?
Yeah, this is a very nice question. I mean, a little bit hard to answer in our case, because at Fraunhofer we are working closely together with companies, and the key success is happening within the companies finally. And for me personally, I have the Innovation Rockstar moments when I see companies applying our results and being successful with this support or with this help from our side.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. Sven, thank you very much for your time today and the insights into your work and also into the 2 publications today. It was really a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Pleasure on my side, and looking forward to the other episodes here.
And to everybody listening and watching, if you would like to connect with Sven for more insights on the future of innovation, just shoot us an email at info@innovation-rockstars.show, or just leave a comment anywhere where you just listened to this episode. Now, that's it. Thanks for listening. Take care and bye-bye.
Innovation Rockstars.
That was Innovation Rockstar Sven Schimpf from the Fraunhofer Innovation Group. Do you have any questions, or would you like to learn more about the studies Sven presented today? Then just email us at info@innovation-rockstars.show. More exciting contributions to our podcast series to be found on our website at www.innovation-rockstars.show, or in our Innovation Rockstars channel on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.